Along the Ganges River in the nation of India, it is a time in the course about once a year where millions and millions of Hindus gather together, making it one of the world's largest religious festivals. And they gather at a particular point along the Ganges for the purpose of a spiritual ritual where people, literally in the millions, go into this river and dip and splash themselves in the water for the purpose of this, for the forgiveness of their sins, for somehow to have the sins that they've committed in the past washed away right up to the present. Why do these Hindus do this? This 55-day-long festival filled with all kinds of activities. Why do they do this? Because it's something that all of us are born with. The search for forgiveness, where we are ridden with this sense of guilt or shame or just oppression because of the things that have gone on in our life that we know are not right. And there's just a sense of dirtiness. And we search and trying to find ways to be forgiven. I want to share with you about the keys to forgiveness. Keys. I have a set of keys right here, and these keys open some doors. Keys, they let us in places. They let us out of places. They keep other people from getting in places. Keys are an important part of our culture, no matter where we live in the world. Car keys are important too. And by the way, you got to make sure you take your car keys out of your ignition before you lock them. Recently, I closed my car door. Only, maybe you've had this happen before, a split second later, went, oh, and looked in there, and there's a beautiful set of keys sticking in the ignition. Sure, right where they're supposed to be when the car's running. Well, I had to go ahead and pay for somebody to come down and to be able to get in. But then sometime later, I was working in the rear end of the car, underneath the car, and I went ahead and saw this black box in there. Began to dig around in this black box, opened it up, and guess what? There was a spare key from the previous owner. It was a used car. And I thought, if I would have known that key was there, I would have been able to get in. Well, you know what? You may not know this, but there are keys, spiritual keys, that open the doorway to heaven, that lead to the gift of forgiveness. I want to walk through those spiritual keys with you so that you can open the doorway to true and lasting forgiveness. Let me ask a question. Would you like to know for certain you've been forgiven for everything? And there's two important parts to that. One is, would you like to know for certain, meaning no sense of doubt. You know for sure that you've been forgiven, not just on good days you know and bad days you wonder, but certain. The other part is for everything. Over the years, as I've talked with people, they have said, I have a hard time forgiving myself for X, Y, and Z that I did when I was younger. Or they might say, I don't know if God can forgive me for some of the things that I've done. Well, what would you say if you could know for certain that you've been forgiven for everything? The first key is God, is knowing that He is the creator of life and He also is the provider of forgiveness. When it comes to God, He doesn't live in earthly built structures. God Himself, He doesn't live in synagogues, He doesn't live in mosques, He doesn't live in temples, He doesn't live in in the churches that dot a lot of our corners across our American cities. He doesn't live in something that we might build, a special prayer room or whatever it might be where we might go and worship. He doesn't live there. And God doesn't need us to serve Him where He needs us to give Him things. God doesn't need us to give Him money to help pay His bills. God doesn't need us to bring Him food so He can eat. God doesn't need us to open the door to His presence so people can come in. God doesn't need us to serve him. God, by very definition of who he is, deity, being eternal, great and mighty God, he is self-sufficient, self-contained. He doesn't need us for anything, but he chooses to have us. He chooses to reach out to us because he wants to. And that reveals an important part of God, that God is a giver. He gives. He gives life. He gives forgiveness. When it comes to this regarding life, the Bible says, God created man in his own image. Male and female, he created them. You and me, we are made in the image of God. It goes beyond a medical explanation, a science, a biological explanation. There's a spiritual aspect to it. God himself knit us together in our mother's womb. God knew our name and knew what we would look like long before our parents or our doctor or anybody else thought they would. The other thing about God is that he is the provider of forgiveness. The Bible says this, but with you there is forgiveness, that you may be feared. Forgiveness, where does it come from? It comes from God. God is the creator of forgiveness. He's the author, the founder, the architect, the originator. Forgiveness comes from him because he's a God who gives. And forgiveness is something we search for and that we want. And God, in his nature as a giver, wants to be able to give it to us. Another question, why doesn't everyone have or experience God's forgiveness? There are some people that have, like for instance me. I have experienced God's forgiveness, and there are others like me that have. There's a sense of joy and a sense of peace and a sense of freedom that comes with knowing that you are forgiven.